Welcome to Slow Down to Speed Up. I'm your host, Brian Wang, and today is the start of Mental Health Awareness Month. So we have a very special episode with Laura Shook Guzman. Laura is a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a leadership coach for entrepreneurs. In our conversation, we talk about the most common mental health challenges that Laura and I both see in our founder clients. This is an incredibly important topic because more often than not, founders tend to sacrifice their own well-being in service of building their companies, not appreciating how it can lead to serious long-term health effects, as well as lower their chances of success in the long run. We talk about the nature versus nurture aspects of founder mental health challenges, the importance of awareness of our unconscious survival mechanisms, as well as ways that ambitious achievers can better take care of themselves along the marathon of building a startup. Quick note, if you're a founder who is struggling with their mental health, I highly encourage you to seek help, whether that's with the support of a therapist, a coach, even a trusted friend. There's no shame in getting help. The fact of the matter is that we're all vulnerable humans who can't go it alone, and there's no reason for you to go it alone either. So I just want to make sure that you're taking care of yourself throughout this journey. Okay, let's get into the episode. Hope you enjoy. Hey, Laura, it's so great to see you today.
So good to be here, Brian. I'm excited about our conversation.
Yes, it is a special conversation for those who are listening. This is a pretty unique one where you and I are going to have a chance to talk about some pretty salient topics having to do with mental health and how mental health sort of presents itself for founders and startup entrepreneurs, leaders, and anyone in of that ilk. And Laura, just to introduce you to the audience real quick, like you have a really unique perspective on this whole topic. You're a psychotherapist, you're a coach, you've been working with clients and founders. You've been working as a therapist now for over 20 years, a coach with founders for over 15 years. So you are just a wealth of knowledge and experience in this whole realm. And I'm really excited to just dive into this topic with you today. And I think maybe just to kick off the conversation with you, given that we're talking about like how does mental health show up for founders, maybe the first question I want to even start with is, what do you find in your work to be, some of the most common mental health challenges in the founder population that you work with?
Yes, good question. And it's my pleasure to be here, Brian. Thanks for highlighting mental health in this moment for founders. It's when I think about the different presenting challenges that my clients come in, they really fall into these buckets of like fear of failure, isolation, feeling like they're all alone and not understood by people around them. Also feeling really afraid of disappointing people or having all this responsibility. Like literally, I've had clients say like, there's so much on my shoulders that I sometimes just don't know, what to do. I'm so afraid that I'm going to botch it, right? And so there's all this anxiety. So I'd say like from a clinical perspective, from a therapeutic space, it would be anxiety and depression, insomnia, helplessness, crying spells. I even have people kind of, check the box a little bit on their intake of these different experiences that they're having. And that's what I see over and over again. You have these very successful, high-performing leaders, founders, but yet they're ticking those boxes: depression, anxiety, can't sleep, not eating, regular meals, struggling in my marriage or in my relationship, struggling to show up as a parent. So that is what I am seeing a lot for founders. And I think the thing that really struck me is how they're managing the impressions they make on everyone. So you don't see that. They seem great. And then they would come in my office where they had a safe, confidential space and open up to say, this may look great from the outside, but I am really struggling here.
That's its own special form of torture, right? Just like to go out into the world and to put on a mask, essentially, right? And tell people, hey, I'm fine, or I'm doing great, or I'm crushing it, as a way to shield the world from what's actually happening internally, right? That's its own form of stress.
Yes.
What I heard from what you were sharing, Laura, is that whether it's anxiety or depression, imposter syndrome, burnout, like so much of the what's underlying that or fueling it is that isolation.
Yes.
This sort of sense that like, oh, I'm all alone in handling like the bulk of the challenge. Or even if I have a team around me, even if I have co-founders, it's that feeling like it's all on me. Is kind of the main thing I heard from you, and it certainly resonates with my own experience, personally as well as working with clients. I'm wondering, like, that feeling of being alone, being isolated, like, how much of that do you sense is the nature of the job versus like a sort of a self-inflicted framing that people put upon themselves?
Hmm. I think there's a little bit of that combination, and therapy, as we say, the nature and the nurture is there. It's kind of like there's a bit of, the personality types of those that go into entrepreneurship are often high performing individuals that have learned to sort of have wear the mask well, to look like they've got this, to feel like they have responsibility, to
Mm.
look as if they're fine. They overfunction maybe for other people in their life, may have done that when they're young and now they do it now. So there's sort of this internal pressure of, I have to be excellent. And this is very important that I don't burden anyone else. And so I'm just going to figure it out. And I have to do that. That's just what I do. Right. Is this sort of the mental
And,
um,
and I'll just
schema.
jump in. I want to let you keep
Yeah.
going, but I just
Yeah.
what came up for me as I heard that was, I can also imagine how that also that pattern really rewards people. It rewards people as they're starting companies, right? Because if your operating system is, I have to achieve and I have to outperform and I have to be in service of others, and get all the accolades, then you can see how that might lead them on a path to starting companies and raising money and really achieving, because like you've got that internal driver that leads them into a position of being the leader, right? We tend to promote and elevate people who are outworking everyone else, and being very achievement oriented.
Yes. So it's like a moth to the flame in a way. Like,
Yeah.
this is such a good fit for this personality type to be able to find themselves in these situations, and they thrive in it. They're, to a certain extent in the beginning, there's also an increase of or a higher capacity. So there has been research, Dr. Michael Freeman, which anyone that's looked into mental health for founders probably has already heard of his name. He's a psychiatrist that did research, Touched by Fire, to look at what is this personality. Is it that founders have a certain amount of a personality type that leads to having these mental health issues, or is it the entrepreneurship itself that creates the
Right.
mental health, right? And the chicken or the egg, or the nature nurture. And so it is really interesting. Often we have a higher, and I say we because I'm identifying right here, just like you, with my own experience and with my clients. We have a high capacity for stress, and we have a high capacity for tolerating risk. And
Right.
so
Right.
that serves us very well in the beginning. I myself am a recovering perfectionist, as Brene Brown
Yeah.
refers to. I was the golden child in my family. So there was like this, it's familiar, and I ran with it, and it was really easy to like take that skill set into becoming a founder, running a business. And so yes, there's like all of this ways in which there's a personality there. And the nature piece of this, or the nurture, I'm sorry, the
Right. Right.
environmental
Yeah.
piece of
Yeah. Yeah.
it, right, is that, well, this is kind of a part of the landscape. The ecosystem is, you have to manage the impressions that you're making on others when you are seeking investment. You want to look like a good investment. You want to look solid. You
Right.
don't want to, appear that you could be struggling with your mental health. You want to appear that strong with all your key stakeholders, which may be also friends and family that are rooting for you, and other competitors that you may see, like, oh, they can't see me sweat, sort of thing. So
Yeah.
we're constantly managing those impressions,
Yeah.
and
So
the
they're like a perfect fit for each other.
yes, yes, yeah, it's like this. Unfortunately, it can work like, it has a good thing, a good match, but then it has this shadow side. If we're going to use sort of the therapeutic language here, this shadow is that when it gets too much. There's too much impression management happening, too much stress, and isolation happens, right? And that's when stigma also occurs, is you have shame and isolation. What's
Yeah.
wrong with me? Everyone else is fine, or I should be fine. And then we're not talking about it. That's when we get into dangerous territory and
Yeah.
things can go off rails. We can start to struggle and move into problematic feelings and
So
behavior.
let's talk about that. So
Yeah.
I think you're leading me to where my next question was going to go, which is so when founders find themselves in this position where it's like it's all on me, I have to really manage my my impression and how I come across to everybody else. And then that pressure builds until now it's actually just far too much for the system to cope with, right? Then that starts to manifest for them, as you were saying, in certain feelings, thought patterns, behaviors. I'm curious for you, when you start to see the pressure becoming overwhelming, and then the founders need to find ways to cope in some way. And we
Yeah.
might use the language of like dysfunctional coping patterns. I'll use that term lightly, but like,
Yeah.
how do you see that start to then play out in the folks that you work with?
Yeah. Yeah. I like to use the word adaptive versus maladaptive because I feel like
Right.
that's a compassionate way of thinking, right?
Yeah.
It's like we do a lot of things that are adaptive up to a point, but then when it gets into extremes, they become maladaptive. So what we might have done earlier in our life, like even this personality type, if we were type A, we were performing, we studied, we were disciplined, we wanted to be top in our class. There were a lot of these things that were like this type of hyper focus, this capacity to handle stress. It was an adaptive skill set until at some point we're in even higher levels of stress and we've only learned the skill of pushing through.
Right.
We haven't learned how to rest and recover. We haven't learned how to be able to decompress or complete the stress response cycle. This is what I talk with my clients a lot about. It's not that you don't have stressors, but you've got to learn how to metabolize that stress. So when the stressors are outpacing our capacity to work with them, so that becomes when we develop maladaptive techniques sometimes, like
Yeah. Say more about
where
that.
yeah, like, so what happens is that in order to cope with the stress, say we like start to push through, well, you have to numb, you have to disconnect from your fatigue, you have to like sleep less, you have to disconnect sometimes from relationships, like numbing yourself out even unconsciously so that you can just keep going. So there's things that we start to do, and distraction numbing can lead us to addictive behaviors because
Right.
we're trying to avoid discomfort
Right.
so that we can keep racing. So what do you reach for? Alcohol or different types of drugs, different types of technology addictions, shopping addictions, sex addictions. These are all types of things that I'll see in my practice where the person has started to be unable to tolerate or feel or cope with the current discomfort of their situation. And so the addictive behavior is a maladaptive way of numbing and disconnecting and giving them a sense of false relief, like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
right,
And
getting a
yet I would
break.
imagine that actually just makes it worse, right? Especially if you're going to go isolate from the people around you, especially like important relationships where we were just talking about how isolation itself, like as humans, we all have this innate need for connection, right? To be in safe relationships. I would imagine that if you're actually distancing yourself from these important others, then that actually just compounds the issue for a lot of people.
Yes. And there is for high performers, there's a certain amount of shame that I'm not keeping up, like something's wrong with me. And so I disconnect from ourselves. That leads to disconnection with others. And then there's shame about the fact that that's happening. And one of the really important pieces of my work is normalizing. That's why we're even having this conversation, you and I, is normalizing that this is a very difficult, high stress, environment. And these risks and this uncertainty is pervasive.
Yeah.
And it's going to take its toll on anybody's mental health. And I try to help my clients see you are not broken. There is nothing wrong with you as a person. You are full of intrinsic worth and value, and really high level of stress stacked onto other high level stress is leading you to a place to feel something really hard is happening to you, to your mind, to your body. And this is going to happen to any human. This is a part of the human experience. If we work at really high extremes and we haven't learned how to pace, if we haven't learned how to reach for connection, we don't have anybody to talk to like a coach or a therapist, then we will start to find ourselves using maladaptive coping mechanisms in order to stay safe, in order to survive.
Now, one of the things that this is making me think about is, I've often encountered a situation where I might be having a conversation with a founder, and it gets pretty clear for them that, like, I'm not in good shape, right? Like, things are not going well internally in terms of their mental, emotional health. And they might recognize that they're anxious, depressed, burned out, or a number of other things. And yet, even with that awareness, there's this sense that, like, but they can't stop, right? Like, it's like, no. If I stop what I'm doing, then it's all gonna go away. It's all gonna crumble.
Yes.
And I'm curious for you, like, have you encountered that as well in your own work? And if so, how do you, as a clinician, as a coach, tend to respond in situations like that?
Yeah, that is very common. I see this in my work. I see this in forums that I'm reading. I'm just like this constant need to just keep enhancing productivity. I need to just get better. I need to get stronger. If the stress is hurting me, I just need to like be able to track it on my Apple Watch or my Whoop band, or take the right supplements.
Right.
And
right.
It's interesting because I get that has been the strategy for people like us for a long time, is like just how to get even better. What I say to my clients is that we are animal bodies at the end of the day, though. Even though we aspire to be machines, we create the technology that we aspire to be, is my philosophy. And yet, as humans, we are still animal bodies. And at the end of the day, when we learn the science of rest and recovery, and we value that on par with productive, energetic output, then we are at our best human performance.
Yeah. Sounds like you had another thought to add there.
Well, and it's like that reframe, I think, is so powerful.
Yeah.
For my most, I'd say, high achieving clients, it stumps them for a bit. And we really sit with that for a moment, and they get it. That's kind of it's like the reframing of how do you want to be your most excellent self, or in Gay Hendricks, who wrote The Big Leap.
Yep.
If you're going to be in your zone of genius, then you've got to learn how to balance out rest and recovery with those superpowers.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. What occurs for me, that really resonates with my own experience with myself, personally, with others. And what came up for me also was like, what I find that there tends to be this really like, I could use the best analogy or metaphor in the world. I could be like, you know what, to not take care of yourself or to not rest is almost like an Olympic athlete who doesn't have an off season, or who doesn't spend time in recovering because they know that their body needs that. And yet what I found is a lot of times people can conceptually get that, but on an emotional level, there's still like this resistance, this like, oh no, there's no way I can actually consider that. And what I've found is, at least this is my sense of it, there's like just fear. It's like, I don't know what's on the other side of that. Like I'm afraid of what might happen if I were to change the way I'm approaching things, if I were to take some time and rest. Um,
Mhm.
and so that's an element to address, to be with, and really start to process like what that fear is really about. And then there's this other side of it, which unfortunately I think a lot of people find is like the only way they can get there is they almost have to hit like rock bottom. Like they have to
Mhm.
like feel the pain of burnout so acutely, that they're like, okay, I never want to touch that again. You know, it's like they
Yes.
have this like visceral experience of it. Like, okay, it's just clear I can't do that to myself again. And that's
Mhm.
where like there's enough push to change their approach to things, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
I'm wondering
Yeah.
if you found parallels in your own work.
Absolutely. That is what I see. And I'm kind of the rock bottom person that people come to
Mm.
when they are at the rock bottom.
You
They
should,
come
you should put that
into
on your branding. Just like I'm the rock bottom, I'm the rock bottom coach.
when they're at their rock bottom, that's when they come knocking on my
Right.
door. And so you're right that often, and they will even be able to identify if they would have paid attention sooner, they probably could have avoided getting to this place. But rock bottom is like they're going through a divorce. They have a huge health issue now. They've lost a relationship with other loved ones. They don't like the parent that they've become.
Mm.
Their team, their co-founder is left. And, it's like these really big instrumental moments. And they often, that's when people, because it is human nature, like, don't fix what's not broken, right? We just
Yeah.
kind of keep going, even if we know that it's taking a toll. And yet I do think that with the increase of awareness around mental health, like that's why it's so important to me that we keep talking about it and telling these stories, is
Yeah.
that maybe people will kind of go, oh, they're talking about me. I'm at that cusp. And I think if I keep going, I'm going to be at that rock bottom.
Right.
And so my hope is that we're going to start to kind of get into people's awareness a bit more, that they'll recognize I don't want to be losing my marriage before I take this step, or I don't want to be losing my health before this happens.
Yeah.
But it is what I have seen. And it's great for so many of those founders that they actually go back in. And I notice once they've worked through their rock bottom and they're in recovery and they're feeling better, and they're like, they go and help and they're mentoring and they're teaching other founders. So I see this kind of beautiful feedback loop that's happening more and more, that burnt out founders are
Yeah.
mentoring and creating solutions
Yeah.
for those of us that are, still in the arena.
Yeah. It's that just, I think, underscores the importance of sharing your stories out in public. All right. So it's one thing to hear about these things in the abstract, but when you have founders who are publicly talking about the health issues that they start to encounter, or their marriage falling apart, or some other really, really challenging experience, it makes it very real. And
Mm-hmm.
um, there's a way for founders who have gone through that cycle to, at the very least, like use that story as a way to help others, avoid these pretty avoidable errors. Um,
Yeah.
and errors is a strong word, but like avoid paths that I think pretty reliably lead to
Mm-hmm.
um, these outcomes. And there's something that you said a little while ago that struck me. You said something around like, "Oh, don't fix if it ain't broken," right? And what really struck me about that was this idea that, going back to the inertia that founders
Mm-hmm.
often are operating under, it's like, I got to keep going. I got to keep going. They're aware that it's like taking a toll on them, but they got to keep going. And what really saddens me, I just noticed I felt really sad in hearing it, was, or just touching this, was there's like a fundamental like undervaluing of the self. It's like, I am willing to sacrifice my own well-being, or
Yeah.
not even take it into consideration, um, so as to advance the interests of the business, right?
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's so sadly common, and it makes me wonder what causes founders often to be in that space where they're just like, you know what, like, it doesn't matter if I suffer, right?
Yeah.
Maybe it's clear to them when it's like, oh my God, my marriage is falling apart, or like, oh my God, like I have this serious health issue. It's like, it's really in your face. But
Hmm.
there's just like this, it's almost as if my self-sacrifice, it's not going to catch up to me,
Hmm.
right? It's sort of
Hmm.
abstract,
Hmm.
because they're not really taking the time to really consider what's
Yeah.
happening.
Right.
I'm wondering what you think maybe drives that little kind of head in the sand, or going back to the devaluing component. What do you think drives that?
Hmm. There can be different drivers, but the one that comes to mind as you're saying it right now is when we have existing adaptive patterns that were survival patterns, often call them even somatic survival patterns, because sometimes it's in our body more than it is even in our conscious mind. But if we grew up in a way that we learned to, that our survival was dependent on making sure that everything else around us was taken care of or okay,
Hmm.
then we can bring our childhood patterns and experience our early family dynamics into our current way in which we operate as a founder and run our businesses. And as a family systems therapist and coach, this fascinates me. And this is my origin story as a founder in a
Can you
lot of
say more
ways.
about that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mentioned already that I was the golden child. On top of that, I learned that I could help decrease the stress in my family the more high performing I was. And that was something that I kind of picked up indirectly. It wasn't always a explicit message, it was more implicit, but I am an empath. I'm very sensitive to things around me. So when I noticed like there was any distress in the family, then I would get easier to parent. I would be an easier kid. I would perform better.
Hmm.
And as long as I was performing, then everything seemed to get easier around me. So I was taking care of my own, I was regulating myself
Yeah.
by being in that performer role.
Yeah.
And then the system was good. So
Right.
if
Right.
I work really hard, the system stays good, right?
Yeah, and which,
So,
as you know, is not your job as a child,
right, it's
right?
not your job.
At that
Yeah.
point, at such a young age, it's the parent's role to help you regulate, to connect with
Yes.
you, right? But
Yes.
in that instance, you're sort of reversing it. I got to take
Right.
care of my parents or my family, right?
Right.
Because they can't do it
Exactly.
themselves right now. Yeah.
Yes. And so what we call that in psychology is parentified kids, like
Right.
a parentified individual takes on the responsibilities of a parent that's developmentally too soon. And in my family system, there was a significant loss and trauma. I unfortunately lost my brother who passed away when he was 19. I was 16. So my family system was already a little like I still was that child and I was always the easier kid and my brother was the difficult child to parent. But when he passed, I even more stepped into I don't want my parents to feel any more discomfort. So at
Hmm.
16, I took on what was a 20, 30, 40-year old's role without my parents asking me to. And so what that led me into was doing that same for people around me. And so as I created a company, then I became instrumental and
Yeah.
I put all this responsibility on the impression that I made on others and decreasing my team's discomfort, my clients' discomfort. And so there was all these ways in which I built my company
Yeah.
on that early pattern.
And you had to
And it
take
was
all that on for everybody else, right? That
exactly
was your superpower.
that was my superpower. And so I see that in my clients and I name for them like, you are not alone. It's very common for parentified kids that were the oldest in the family or that had a trauma in their family like mine to assume this role
Yeah.
and then to unconsciously play it out
Hmm.
inside of your organization.
Right.
And then you feel even more that you can't step away. And you don't consciously even know, oh, this is emotionally uncomfortable for me because of my childhood
Right.
experience. And so it wasn't until I had like a kind of a burnout situation in which I had to ask myself, why am I doing this to myself?
Right. Right. Yeah. And
Yeah.
let me ask you, Laura, like as a therapist, you have this unique perspective, right?
Yeah.
So um, have there been cases where you worked with somebody, a founder, um, and went to that level of depth where you helped them see that, wow, there's some family of origin stuff here going on. There's some really like early developmental wounding occurring that's now playing itself out in the way you're showing up as a leader. I'm wondering if you have cases where you got to that level of awareness and then helped that founder not just recognize that, but move past that or move through that.
Yes, I have, and it's a very satisfying experience for both me and the client, because it's all of a sudden the bringing out, and this happens in a lot of coaching and therapy, but I can, bringing the shadow into the light and just all of a sudden making these things conscious in order to shift how they show up and feel about themselves in the world. But there's a special gift in seeing how it plays out for a founder, because I can see them lighting up, like their light bulbs happening, because sometimes when we're just looking at that dynamic within our family, we have so much emotional connection to our family. We benefit, but I don't think see it in the same way as like when you apply that to your team or your organization. Like I just recently had a conversation where a client had a breakthrough with a parental figure and was like, and then I said, do you see this parallel that's playing out? So your relationship to authority there in your childhood, and then how is that playing out right now with you showing up as a leader and some of the challenges you and I've been working through? And it was like, ding, this light bulb is like, oh, I see it in my team and how good it feels for them to have that insight. It's like I've given them the playbook or something that they didn't have before, where they feel re-energized to engage with their team, more motivated, because now they have an understanding, oh, this is why I've been stuck in this thing, or this is why I haven't felt as effective as a leader. And it's not because something's been wrong with me, but it's because there's been some unconscious patterns that I haven't healed, that I've been playing out in this groove that I just no longer want to go down anymore. And now I have the freedom to choose another path.
Yeah.
And that's what's beautiful. Yeah. About the consciousness.
I love that you use that word freedom, right? It's upon recognition. It's upon like that clear seeing, the awareness of, oh yeah, right. There's this thing in me that really drives my behavior, drives my experience here. If I can see it clearly, right, see through it, then I can choose something differently, right? Previously, because it was completely, if we want to use the term shadow, it was in my shadow, it was not my awareness. Like previously, it just felt like this is the way things are. This is how I am, right?
Yes.
What, right? Yeah. Like, of course I'm going to do this, right? This is my default. This is my personality, right? And then it sounds like what you're saying is when they're able to recognize, oh, there's a damn good reason I show up in this way, right? And it has its roots from probably quite long ago. And I can really appreciate why I learned to do that. And as I can just be with that, now I can, as an adult, I can decide, is this really how I want to show up here? Or might I want to choose a different path, right? But until you actually understand that that's what's happening, it's very hard to make a different choice.
Yeah. It's a game changer for founders to bring this consciousness into their awareness. And I don't think that many founders realize how much programming is running underneath their conscious awareness. I mean, a lot of people don't. A lot of people think, oh, I'm conscious of everything I'm doing. And as a coach yourself and as a therapist myself, like we see that our job is to help name the things that they can't see about themselves.
Yeah.
And when those tools become available, when that consciousness becomes available, I say to my clients, it's like, you're no longer just going through this darkness into a cave that you're just going in again and in again. And you're like, why am I here again? You're going through a tunnel. So it gets dark there are times when we're doing this work that people are very concerned, like, I don't know what's wrong, why am I doing this, or how will I ever, break this pattern? But the tunnel means that there is a light,
Mm,
and we keep working and we keep working. And we know that once we come out the other side of that tunnel, not only is there light, but it's a whole new landscape. You entered that tunnel on one side, but you're coming out into a different state.
right.
And that's the work. And so I
Mm,
really try to help my founders realize, like, it may feel uncomfortable and you may feel like you're just going into this dark hole,
yeah.
but with working together, like helping take them through the tunnel and feel the feelings. And
Mm,
there's an expression in somatic work that the issues are in the tissues.
right.
So we breathe, we work through our thoughts, we work through our sensations and our behaviors. And then when we bring all that into consciousness, they have a new path, and they get to have that choice. How
Mm,
am I going to be in my business
right.
now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That that's that really resonates, Laura. And I love that analogy, like kind of coming out the other side, like a brand new landscape, right? It's like a new way of seeing. And um, like I'm a huge fan of the idea of being able to work through that internal transformation. And what came up for me as I was listening was how often it is that um, founders will come into coaching, and the focus is on, like, I want to hit these business milestones, these achievements. There's nothing wrong with that,
Right.
but the attention is really on the outer world, what's going on out there, and any then hint or idea of starting to direct the attention on the internal world. Oh, can I examine myself? Can I really start to explore that? That can be terrifying, and maybe not even consciously so much as just like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, why would I care about that? Why, like, right, what interest might I have in that? Right? What's that going to produce for me? That's not going to make me more productive, right? And so it's interesting because um, I found that time and time again, when anyone, but especially a founder, is able to step into a type of work where, like, you know what, it is important for me to deepen my own self contact, right? To
Mm-hmm.
really understand what's happening for me as a human first and foremost, where
Yes,
the most powerful shifts take place, right? Rather
that's
than,
right.
okay, cool, let me figure out how to be a more effective delegator. Nothing wrong with that,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's a time
Mm-hmm.
and a place for that.
Yeah.
But I think, as you and I can both probably agree, it's when you start to shine a light on the internal experience and understand, like, what is driving me really, right? And then when you start to play in that realm, then everything else externally, there's just way more freedom, right? Like, yeah, we could talk, we can agree on, like, what you might want to do, blah 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 blah, specific steps, but
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff just becomes way less daunting when there's this kind of clear, again, I'll just go back to that term, that clear self contact. I'm curious what you think about that
Yes.
idea.
Ooh, I love clear self contact, because my advice to you about how to hire better or delegate or scale your company is going to come from my self contact. It's not yours. And so it's probably not the best thing for you to do anyway, in a way. Like, I
Right.
can mentor you, but when you step into that self contact, you ask yourself, what's the resistance to hiring the team that I really want and need? Then you get to the place where your own answers drop in. You, at some level, unconsciously know why the hiring practice isn't working.
Hmm.
I'm there to help you pull that out, to illuminate that unconsciousness so that you can go, oh, I have some self doubt about myself as a leader. When I bring in people that are more senior,
Yeah.
I go into a fear place. So we examine that fear.
Yeah.
To your point, that is the foundational information needed to be able to drop into your own wisdom.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
in my experience, it takes a certain level of courage to
Yes.
look at oneself
Yes.
in that way. Yeah.
It's vulnerable. It's a vulnerable experience that we're inviting people into. And I love this whole theme of your podcast, Brian, because you're asking people to show up in a very courageous way and to share their stories. And that's what we ask of inside of our client work, inside of ourselves. And it's a game changer, It's
Yeah.
everything that we need in order, I think, to self-actualize ourselves as human beings and become the leader, founder, person that we are feeling called to become.
I think we're getting towards a really, really good way to close this out. So I have not much to add to that, Laura. So just in the last few minutes, I want to ask you, just from your experience, just based off of the conversation that we've had here, what advice, practices, tools, I know you got some tools to share as well, but what actionable things might you want to recommend to founders listening to this conversation when it comes to proactively taking care of their own mental health, as they're walking the journey of building their businesses?
Yeah, great question. I think that if they're listening right now and this sparks a curiosity to consider who might be a person to add to your team as well, as far as like, do you have a sounding board? Do you have a mentor? Do you have a peer group? Do you have a coach? Do you have a therapist? Knowing that you don't have to walk this alone, that the tunnel can be really long, and it's great to have a companion to go through with you. So thinking about that. And then obviously there's the essentials around if you're worried about your mental health, remembering that coming back into connection, this clear self-contact means getting good rest, setting boundaries with technology and your time, clearing time off of your calendar to really sit with oneself, to move your body or get into nature. Like all of these things that will kind of help regulate your system will help you come into that contact. And then there's multiple things that you can do from there to reach for help, to do some deeper dive, breath work, meditation, yoga, all these things. I will say that during May, there's Mental Health Awareness Month, resources everywhere, and including on my own website, which lives actually throughout the year, is Tools for Founders Project. And that's a project that I have been spearheading and managing for the last 3 years. And there are podcasts, articles, and organizations such as Palea, which is a great integrative coaching network that will match founders with coaches. So there's a lot out there for founders, and I'm sure we can drop those into the show notes.
It'll all be in the show notes. Yep.
Yes, to explore.
Yeah.
But I would say start with exploring yourself and asking for some help and some guidance. And then most likely things will start to show up in the light that will give you the next step forward. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great closing note. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed this. It's been a pleasure, Laura.
Yeah, thank you so much for just raising awareness and bringing attention to this topic today, and with all of your conversations, the stories that you share with your podcast. So I thank you for that.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, take care, Laura.
Thank you.
Bye.
We'll talk soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Slow Down to Speed Up. If you enjoy this conversation and you want to hear more like it, then please make sure to give the show a like, a subscribe, or rate it in your favorite podcasting app. I'd be incredibly grateful for your support. And if you're a founder who's interested in leveling up their leadership by working with a coach, then please feel free to reach out to me at dashingleadership.com.